Thank you. Well, we will be continuing discussion on climate and food, and I would like to introduce Devex senior reporter Michael Igoe. You might be familiar with his byline. You might also be familiar with his voice if you've been listening to our Climate Plus podcast, which if you haven't, it's a podcast we've been releasing in lead up, and we will be releasing more episodes this week and in the following weeks, looking at the many ways that climate intersects and impacts the SDGs. You can scan, there'll be a QR code at some point you can scan, there you go, to learn more about Climate Plus. But in the meantime, I'll hand it over to you, Michael. Thanks.
How's everyone doing? There's enough coffee. Coffee's holding out. It's great to see you all. I'm Michael Igoe, senior reporter with Devex, and I'm joined by just a fantastic panel here. I actually feel really badly because I had to interrupt them in the green room where they were solving problems of smallholder farmers and sustainable agriculture. But I was glad to pull them away and to come onto the stage to share some insights with you all today. Joining me are Dr. Jemimah Njuki, who is the Chief of Economic Empowerment at UN Women, Sandra Uwera, who is the CEO of Fairtrade International, and Alloysius Attah, the co-founder and CEO of Farmerline. And we're here to have a conversation about sort of where the rubber hits the road when it comes to climate action. Each of these folks here is supporting, through their work, populations that are uniquely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, but also uniquely capable of delivering solutions to the climate crisis. And they're all coming at this from different and fascinating directions, and many are engaged very closely in the negotiations here at COP. So thank you all for being here. This is really wonderful to have you. I wanted to start sort of from that point. Each of you is working on an issue that would be challenging and daunting enough without the climate crisis. And yet we have one. So I wonder if you could start just by talking us through how the reality of climate change and the additional pressure of climate change comes to bear on the work that you do in sort of an operational way. How does the climate crisis manifest in either the solutions that you're bringing, the services that you're bringing to the communities that you serve, or just the way that you think about sort of your work from a strategic perspective? And Sandra, I wonder if we could start with you. I'm going to put you right on the spot. You're in the middle.
Well, thank you. So for those of you who may not know what Fairtrade is the leading social certification mark that looks at enforcing social compliance within the grassroots level. We work with about 2 million producers across the world, in Africa, Latin America, and in North Asian Pacific, specifically to address challenges that they face within their national ecosystems that look at social governance, good or fair labor practices. We ensure that our producers are able to sell their products at a fair price, gain a premium, and give back to their communities independently. And this promotes decent livelihoods, a decent living income, a decent living wage, and also helps them to understand better how to reinvest back into their communities and become more sustainable and competitive. This poses a lot of challenges within our ecosystems because in this vastly changing world that we're living in, especially after COVID, a lot of businesses are keen to recover, to build back better into their markets, and that has some different challenges. We have seen companies that are focusing on cost leadership, driving more sales of their products at a cheaper price, but we also have seen a lot of businesses that are specifically focusing on social responsibility, business responsibility. So we work with those specific companies who are willing to sell our products at a fair price within their markets so that they can actually give back. Now, it's important to note that a lot of our producers are very keen to sell at a fair price because they want to reinvest, but they work on friction income. This means that they have to consider the day-to-day costs and challenges that they face when they are investing back in their farms. This friction income would go into buying fertilizers or go into buying the right seed at the right time. They also have to consider paying for school fees for the children and also just building into their household income. So the cost of climate adaptation is now being brought to the fore to these producers. And it's not the first thing at the top of their mind to say, let us use the money that we're earning right now to reinvest back into various sophisticated technologies that can help us to mitigate climate challenges on the ground. This poses a big issue. So we continuously call to companies to look at the cost of sustainable production and factor it into the price they actually, the price that they put forward when they're selling their products above the chain. And it's a collective responsibility. So we need the buyers at the top of the supply chain, all the players within the supply chain to take this into consideration because the cost of climate adaptation is very high and the producers cannot bear that cost alone. So these are the day-to-day challenges we continuously are working with. So technology transfer, human resource capacity, cost of finance is very, very high for the producers. And I'm hoping we can have a discussion about how to mitigate that.
Wonderful, absolutely. I hope so too. And Alloysius, I think there's a natural segue here over to you, and that's probably why the two of you were conspiring over on the couches there to solve all of these problems. But you know, I'm interested in what Sandra said here about what's top of mind for farmers, right? And in some cases, maybe it's not yet climate change adaptation. Maybe there's an information gap there. How do you think about providing the services that farmers need right now, but with this longer-term view towards how the world is changing for them?
Yeah, thank you. So Alloysius, Farmerline, we've been around for a decade. We are a digital marketplace for 2.2 million farmers across Africa. Our technology has been deployed across 48 countries. So the question about what is on top of mind of farmers want to grow more food. They want to make more money. Like when you talk to farmers, that's so that's what we focus on. Focus on as an organization. How do we help farmers to grow more food and make more money? Climate change is really, really affecting them. And I'll give a very specific example from Ghana. So in the northern part of the country, Ghana, planting usually starts in July. But before farmers putting the seed on the ground, they wait for the rains to come. Climate change is leading to late rains and fewer rains, which means that some farmers are planting, instead of planting in July and harvesting in December, they end up planting somewhere late August or late September. Late planting basically means that your yield is going to go down, right? So those are some of and if their yields go down, they make less money. If you want to plant in July without rain, it means you have to find a source of water for planting. Some go and invest in irrigation, solar irrigation. Solar irrigation means higher cost of farming. Higher cost of farming means less money in the pocket, right? So what we do basically is how do we get all the information to farmers, work with other partners and get all the information to farmers in the language that they can understand so that they can better be prepared. Because if they don't have the information, if they don't have new knowledge, they will not be prepared. So we give information to them in their native languages, purely in audio. It's like a 911 for farmers. They can get access to information on demand. And then the second thing is that how do we get them the products and services that they need, but they also make it more affordable. Farmers usually have cash flow problems. They have money 4 months out of 12 months in a year, and 4 months, which is usually 4 months during and after harvest. So if they are supposed to plant in July, they often don't have a lot of money sitting down to invest. So working with banks and other institutions to offer the products, but then also offer flexible financing methods in cases where they have to make very little down payment or no down payment, where they pay us back by the end of the season. All these things must go together. Again, their goal is to grow more food and make more money. So providing end-to-end service around information, financing, but then also connecting them to market gets them closer to that goal. And it takes a team sport. And we're very happy to be working with Fairtrade in Ghana and hopefully soon in Ivory Coast to keep making sure we're helping farmers and putting them in a position to grow more food and make more money.
And just very quickly, to make this sort of real for everybody, when you say information, give us an example? What sorts of information are you talking about?
Yeah, information about how to apply fertilizer, very simple things like that.
So extension, agricultural
Yeah,
extension.
extension agriculture, working with weather companies to send weather forecasts to farmers in their native language. We are not a weather company, but we work with Dutch weather companies to send that.
Precision.
Precision, so sending information based on the agroecological zone, right? Someone mentioned earlier that farmers are all not the same. A farmer in the south of Ghana and a farmer in the north of Ghana, they are very different. They plant at different times, they harvest at different times. And depending on the crop that you're growing, the kind of advisor you need is very important. Farmers generally know what to do, but reminding them to take action, the right action at the right time makes a dramatic difference.
Right.
Yeah, so those are the kind of information that we deliver to them on demand in their native language.
Great, great. I'm hoping to save some time for Q&A at the end, so please be generating questions in your heads. But Jemimah, let me come to you. I'm sure as you're listening to this, the gender dimensions of this challenge are going through your head. I know you've been engaged directly in the negotiations here at COP, supporting a lot of different countries and constituencies. But how do you see this set of pressures playing out from the perspective of women in particular, many of whom are farmers, but also have a number of other climate vulnerable livelihoods and concerns?
Thank you very much, and it's such a pleasure to be here. So at UN Women, we see climate change, we call it a threat multiplier, because what's happening is it is actually amplifying a lot of the gender inequalities that we see. And I'll just give a couple of examples. So as droughts become increasingly frequent, what we are seeing is the amount of time that women and girls are then taking to provide for their families, whether it's in terms of fetching water, whether it's in terms of getting fuel wool and access to energy, it's increasing. We are seeing increases in things like gender-based violence as a result of climate change. Just in the Horn of Africa, the last couple of droughts that we have seen a 20% increase in some countries of child marriage, because as families get pushed to desperation, young girls, some as young as 13 years old, are actually paying the price for climate change. We are seeing such an increase in unpaid care work and domestic work by women that it is actually threatening their own livelihoods and their ability to participate in economic activities. So these are real things for women on the ground. On the other hand, we come to COP, and the same lack of representation we see in other spaces, we start to see it in the negotiations and in the discussions. In the last 10 years, around 2011, 2012, the percentage of negotiators at COP that were women was 30%. 2023, 10 years later, we've only increased that percentage by 5. So we moved from 30% representation to 35% representation over 10 years. So on one hand, we are saying the climate crisis is not gender neutral. Women and girls are disproportionately impacted. And then we are coming to these spaces and leaving the same people out that are impacted by the problem. And for us, that's a big issue. Only 20% of the delegations here are led by women. We only have 15% of climate environment ministers that are women. It is really unacceptable in 2023 to be talking about these things. So what we really want to do is, as part of our engagement in COP, we are supporting negotiations, technical support on gender equality, because we really want outcomes, gender equal outcomes for women and girls, while at the same time making sure that we're calling for what we're calling feminist climate justice. And feminist climate justice basically has 4 objectives. First is that we have to recognize the labor, the rights, and the knowledge that women bring, and women in all their diversity, indigenous women, because we know they are all at the forefront of fighting climate change. The second thing we are calling for is representation, that women must be represented. Climate solutions are not going to be effective if they do not include the voices of those that are most affected. And the third thing that the feminist climate justice framework is calling for is redistribution of resources. Only 3% of ODA that's going to climate right now is going to gender equality, and even less is going to women-led organizations. So we also must redistribute the resources. So here we have a lot of conversations on redistribution of resources between the global north and the global south. We're talking a lot about the way the resources are not enough to adapt to climate change, but what we are not always talking about is how much of those resources is actually going to the indigenous women's movements that are restoring degraded lands, that are defending their territories, that are restoring ecosystems. So we must make sure that we are also distributing the resources that we are talking about here. First day, there was a commitment to the Loss and Damage Fund. We must ask the question of how much of that is going to women. And then the fourth R that we are talking about is, now I don't have my R's right, the representation. We have recognition, redistribution, representation, and reparation. And the reparation is really important because that's where the issues of justice are so critical.
Great, thank you. Let me do a quick check for questions, and if I don't see any, oh, all right. And I think we have, my colleague Jess has a microphone here, so she'll run. We'll take a question now, and then I'll jump back in.
Ms. Chege, I work for an international NGO called Child Fund. I would want to continue where Ms. Njuki has talked, the issue of representation of youth and children in these discussions. I think we need to have them on the table. We need to have their voices. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you for the comments. And I wonder, Sandra or Alloysius, how does the equity issue factor into the way that you go about your work? Things like information, things like technology are not equally available to all people. How do you think about that, and how do you try to overcome that challenge when you're providing these services to the communities where you work? Either of you is welcome to jump in first.
Okay.
Yeah, equity. So the way we think about it, or the way we approach it, is usually like try to be very mindful of the geography, but then geography, distribution channel, and then also the crops. So just in our history, first 5 years we're just in the south of Ghana, mostly focusing on cocoa growing crops. Then the last 5 years we expanded to the northern part of the country, so geography changed. We started growing, like supporting more cereals and grains, rice, maize, soybean. Number of women that were increased to 51%, not because of anything like genius that we did, but because we just expanded the crops and then changed the geography, and then and that changed as well. Distribution also, how you select, in the channels that you select to reach the farmers as well. The kind of farmer groups, the leaders of those farmer groups, the kind of agents that you have in your network. Obviously, if you have more women agents, you reach more women farmers. You have males, they get their friends. So just being very mindful about that. And organizations that are also working in the space. Like for us, we always approach this as a team sport. We don't think of it as a winner take all. So if there are organizations that are doing work and they are better in places that we are not, we just we tend to embrace and collaborate with them to get better in places that we are not very strong at. So the way we think about it is mostly geography, type of crop, and also distribution. Just being very mindful to make sure those things actually help us to get the equity that we want to see. Right. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe if we can just give context of the larger ecosystem of agriculture. So about 60 to 80% of agriculture and food systems in the world is driven by small and medium enterprises. Within the small and medium enterprise space, we have small-scale producers and farmers, and a larger percentage of this, about, if I can talk about our 2 million farmers, at least 40% of them are women. Women and also youth who have actually grown into this business space after being educated about technical engagements, and their capacities have been built to actually become agriculture drivers. One of the key challenges we've noted, especially when women go to banks, is that the banks, the financial systems, and the organic aspect, but the financial systems probably consider men as more credit-worthy than women. So if we make a comparison between men and women who are given loans and credits, women are 5 to 10% less viable to getting a loan than a man. Interestingly, I come from a banking background, but we all know that women are actually trustworthy. When you actually borrow, you do give back, you know? So the rate of non-performing loans from women is actually very low, but still, this directly affects how they access credit. And this is an ongoing discussion within the financial inclusion agenda to see how to strengthen the negotiation power, the bargaining power for women and youth in accessing finance and accessing credit across the ecosystems. Within Fairtrade, we have what we call the Fairtrade Ambassadors Program, where we bring together women and youth from Ghana, from Cote d'Ivoire, from West Africa, from Latin America and India, and help them to engage in advocacy agendas and also to speak up confidently about their business ecosystems and also to push forward what they think is viable as a solution to addressing the challenges they face. We've also helped them to build credit references, to have to strengthen their accountability, to put together good bookkeeping services that can help them to become interesting partners in the financial sector. So this is something to continuously pick up. Right. But it's an ongoing challenge that we continuously face. But I'm happy to say that one of our key interests as Fairtrade International is to bring women at the forefront. From Latin America in Peru to India, we have seen that in the coffee sector, a lot of women are in this particular space. Women go on farms, they farm, but they also go back and build a household. And that has also become a very big challenge in terms of how they're able to grow to become more sustainable business practitioners. And so we continuously carry out sensitization within communities and farms on how to give more dedicated time for women to become business owners, business drivers. And also we help husbands to understand the importance of having equity within a household so that there's an equal opportunity for both to balance the households. So these are the kind of works that we actually pick up on at a grassroots level. But it still does have a trickle, it still has an effect on climate change and climate financing. And it's something that my colleague here mentioned earlier. As long as climate adaptation is expensive, it does have an impact on how these businesses are run at a national level, at a community level. One of the biggest challenges we face is that when the cost of fertilizers, when the cost of climate adaptation goes up, it impacts it impacts the pricing of some of these products on the ground. It impacts the performance of the yield of the crops on the ground. And by virtue of that fact, it also removes the players, the women players within the business, within small-scale producer businesses. And that directly pushes back the opportunity for them to participate in trade. And so we need to also consider how there's a ripple effect that is negative that impacts women. Yeah. So we pick up on all these aspects and try to address them at an advocacy level. We bring it forward to our businesses, the companies that are sourcing from Fairtrade. We bring it forward to policymakers. And we also try to come with a collective mechanism of addressing it. But it's not a one-size-fits-all. So we continuously have to go back to the drawing board and say, how are we pushing forward climate adaptation mechanisms at the grassroots level? Right. Everybody needs to be a part of it. Everybody needs to contribute in terms of financial resources, human resources, and technology transfer that's given back to the producers.
Wonderful. Yeah. I have a follow-up question about climate adaptation, but I want to go to the audience to see if we have any more. Yeah, a question in the middle over here.
Thank you. My name's Keith Wingard with Solar Cookers International. I have a quick question about clean cooking, which touches on a lot of things that you're talking about. It's great that we have strategies to improve yields, but you then still need to cook your food oftentimes if you're going to eat it, which touches on gender because often disproportionately impacting women in cooking food, environment in the demand for wood and other biomass sources for cooking, and economic in that you're needing to spend money on your fuel resources. So my question to anyone who wants to take it is, how does clean cooking impact the work that you're doing going forward? Thanks.
Great, thank you.
I'm happy to take that because it's part of the unpaid care work that women and girls do. And one of the things we've also seen is that a lot of the cooking also has health impacts for women. The pollution, the smoke inhalation, and it's causing a lot of deaths actually. So earlier during the COP meetings, the president of Tanzania actually launched a huge program on African women clean cooking support program for African countries. And so it's very important that we are changing the way cooking is done. Women and girls should not really die trying to nourish the world. And so the use of solar for cooking, the use of stoves that actually use less wood, but also cause less pollution is really critical. One of our programs that we have in Kenya, Tanzania, and Nigeria is a program called the Solar Sisters. We work together with Solar Sisters to actually introduce solar to rural communities as a means of improving cooking, as a means of saving energy. But what I really like about that program is it's also building women's entrepreneurship, because the technologies are also produced by women. So we are working with over 100,000 women entrepreneurs who are actually making the technologies and then selling to other women and to other families. So there's a lot still that we need to do there. Some of our analysis is showing that women are actually spending 2.8 hours more than men on a daily basis on unpaid care. And if we do not act on it, by 2050, we'll only have reduced that time by 30 minutes. Yeah? And so some of these technological innovations are really important. But as Sandra said, we also really need to be putting them into the local context in terms of what actually works for different situations and different conditions, because there's also a lot of technological innovations out there that are still out of the reach of many women due to either they're too expensive or they're not fitting within some of their local contexts.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Super quick, go ahead.
Okay, so one of the benefits of digitizing supply chains is, like, from our views, you get to know what's happening, in your supply chain. So, and then you also build the relationship and then the distribution to move product from one place to the other. So from our work, you get to know, like, how much forest farmers are cutting and using for firewood, and you can then work with third-party clean cook stove in service providers to get them these products. So we're working with a company called Envirofit to distribute about 60,000 cook stoves to farmers without actually building any new supply chain. Just leveraging the data that we have, the agent network that we have, the farmer associations, and getting them as much product as possible. It also helps you to think of the farmers, how to support the farmers beyond the farm. They're a whole human being. They need other services beyond just sitting on the farm. They also need to be healthy, as you mentioned. So digitizing actually, like, exposes what is happening, but it also helps to build relationships to get farmers more that they need beyond the farm.
Great. We have to leave it there. Please join me in thanking this excellent panel. Really appreciate you all being here.